So first of all, thank all of you very much for taking time out in your day to come down and join us. Yes, we have no budget. And I would say that by the conduct of my Democratic colleagues today, that they are shrouded in a cloud of financial shame. We have been led into a course that has been uncharted in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, where both a Senate and a House budget have been defeated for political reasons without any public justification or explanation why there were votes against the budget. With that, I would introduce to you a gentleman that all of you know very well and who I think is the individual that knows the budgetary process better than any legislator in the Commonwealth of Virginia, perhaps on comparable grounds with Chairman Putney, the chairman of our Finance Committee of Bolling.
Thank you, Tom. Well, just so you know where we are, today we had before us the Senate Finance Committee substitute for the House budgets. We call them House Bill 29 and 30. But we had superimposed all of the amendments that were passed in the Senate a week or so ago, or last Thursday, I guess it was, onto the House bills, and that's what we had before us. And as you noticed, all of the amendments which were offered in a block passed. There were no exceptions to that, none pulled out, no additional amendments offered. And just to remind you, our budget and our amendments put more money into education, supports the safety net in a way that's consistent with our goals of making sure that our most vulnerable citizens are taken care of, and it is structurally imbalanced. That is, we left no second-year holes. We did not rely upon any type of accounting creativity, but rather a good, solid budget. So obviously, we're all disappointed that our Democrat colleagues chose to vote against it, because now we have no budget to move forward on. So that's our position, that's our posture that we're in. Without a bill, we have nothing to negotiate, and without a bill, we cannot appoint conferees, so we cannot engage with the House of Delegates. So this is a sad day for the Commonwealth of Virginia when one of our principal roles, i.e. adopting a budget that supports education, higher education, health care, public safety, all of the core services of state government as well as local government, has now been sent down the drain with 20 votes. So I'll turn it back over to our leader, Senator Norton.
Thank you, Walter. We're also very fortunate to have with us a gentleman that I think very early on and very appropriately articulated where he thought the Constitution allowed him and where the Constitution constrained him from voting on bills before the Senate, and that is the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Bill Bolling. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Tom. I was thinking on the way down here today, this is like deja vu all over again. It was about a week ago that we stood here and expressed our disappointment and displeasure that our Democratic colleagues had refused to support the passage of a budget after, of course, working on the development of that budget, having a number of their budget amendments incorporated into that budget, in fact, voting for those amendments, and then turning around and voting against the budget. We called on them then to reconsider that course of action, which we felt was both inappropriate and non-productive. We had hoped they would, but unfortunately, as we saw again today, they have taken the same course of action. We're extremely disappointed that our Democratic colleagues have chosen to put politics over policy and politics over people. And in doing that, they are jeopardizing critical funding for a number of very important state programs that the people of Virginia rely on. Senator Stosh mentioned the fact that this budget includes significant additional funding for public education and higher education, for public safety, for health care. It includes significant changes that would benefit state employees, both in terms of pay raises and bonus programs. But I want to take just a minute to talk about what this budget could do to Virginia's efforts to get the economy moving again and create jobs. Because as you all know, that's an area where I've spent just about 100% of my time over the last couple of years. It's important to remember that by voting against this budget, our Democratic colleagues have not just voted against the Senate amendments to the budget, they voted against the entire budget. Let me use just economic development as an example. Over the past 2 years, this caucus, together with our Democratic colleagues, have taken a very aggressive approach to invest over $100 million in new funding in proven economic development and job creation programs. In this budget, we have another $40 million in new funding that was requested and approved for new economic development and job creation programs. By voting against this budget, our Democratic colleagues have not only voted against that additional investment in economic development and job creation, they have in fact voted to slam the door on the progress that we made over the last 2 years, because without a budget, all of these additional investments will be lost. And by their decision to put politics over policy, they could extremely hamper our ability to continue recruiting new business and industry and jobs to our state. Their actions are shameful. Their actions are indefensible. And I would call upon them again over the course of the days to come to change course and to do the responsible thing. To stop putting politics over policy, to stop putting politics over people, and to do the job that the people of Virginia sent them here to do. Let me just close with one other thought. During the course of this session, there have been some 2,500 or so bills and resolutions introduced. Every single one of those bills and resolutions pales in comparison to the adoption of the state budget. By far, the most important thing we will do during this session of the General Assembly is adopt a budget. And if we fail to do that, the responsibility will sit squarely on the shoulders of the 20 Democrats in the Virginia State Senate. And make no mistake about it, the people of Virginia will hold them accountable.
We'll take questions in just a moment. I probably started off very modestly by suggesting that the Democrats found themselves clouded with a cloud of fiscal shame. And as I was thinking on that, 14 letters of the 26 letters in the alphabet come to my mind, and those are the letters that spell obstructionist. If you think about this in the context of what has gone on, we have considered the budget bills on 4 separate occasions, 2 Senate bills and 2 House bills. And it's remarkable to me that the Senate Democrats have taken the approach of voting against those budgets on 4 separate occasions and not have offered not one single amendment to change that budget. You would think that having gone through the process on the Senate budgets and heard the responses that were coming from my Republican colleagues, that strategically they would at least pull out something and offer amendment to say we are trying to improve that budget. This is what we don't like about the budget, and this is how we would try to improve it. Not one budget amendment. And that is absolutely remarkable to me. And then to have the absolute audacity to vote for all of the amendments, saying we concur with the amendments in that budget, but we're going to reject the budget. I'm just not smart enough to figure out that strategy. I would say to you that what's further galling, absolutely galling, is that embedded in that Senate budget and in the substitute that we laid on today are millions and millions of dollars that they requested to put into the budget. And they are millions of dollars that go to education, which they say that they're concerned about, even though we put $165 million more than the governor did in public education. And I might just parenthetically add, they talk about the funding per pupil. If I remember correctly, the Democrats were in charge in 2008, 2009, and 2010 when the funding for public education was cut. They voted for it in 2010, 40-0. Last year on the budget amendments, 40-0. They actively participated and had complicity in cutting the funding to public education because of the recession, and now they say, we have no complicity. I would further say to you that we have put money in there under the direction of Senator Hanger, who is the chairman of the Health and Human Resources Subcommittee. They say, hey, we're sensitive and concerned about the safety net to help poor Virginians. We put money in there to restore the funding on some of those safety nets, and yet they turn around and tell those same people that supposedly they're advocating and protecting for, we think so little of you that we're going to reject this budget, and not only we're going to reject it, we're not going to offer any other solutions. It is absolutely beyond me. And so I say to you with great embarrassment, you know, sometimes we as colleagues have to be embarrassed for our other colleagues because they don't get that they ought to be embarrassed for themselves. I am embarrassed for them. And the reason I'm embarrassed for them, if this is not Washingtonian behavior, I have never seen it. And they think that fun has been made of us on the late night talk shows. This is absolutely intolerable. And you know what nobody has talked about? Not one person has brought up the subject about Virginia still remains on the watch list by Wall Street to determine what's the status of our AAA bond rating. And you think that Wall Street is going to be impressed with the fact that we don't have a budget in Virginia? With that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Norman, what are two things? One, what is the next step? I guess the governor would have to send something down. And then secondly, Senator Hanger the other day in Senate Finance raised the prospect of perhaps punitive action. I think he referenced the cost of repeat money for Northern Virginia. If in fact the next step is the governor sending down a budget, are folks in your caucus going to try to strip out some of those things that you put in there to appease Democrats?
Julian, you reminded me why I just want to hug you every time I see you. That was amazing. Julian, first of all,
you guys want a moment?
Julian and I have way too many moments together. He got a certain fascination with my pink shirts for a while, but he got over it. In response to your first question, Julian, I would say to you that we do not have a strategy that has been established at this time because we were hoping against hope that there would be a Democratic Senate epiphany and they would realize the financial turmoil that they would be creating by voting against the budget and that they would reflect and support it. Now that they have demonstrated the absence of an epiphany, we will develop an alternative strategy. But I would say, Julian, I think that there needs to be a reasonable period of time for the citizens of Virginia to reflect on that fiscally irresponsible behavior, and that perhaps our Democratic Senate friends need the opportunity to hear from local governments who must adopt a budget by May the 1st, to hear from the Department of Social Services that are wondering how they're going to fund those programs for the safety nets that's just denied them, that they hear from the school boards who are wondering how much basic aid they're going to get from Virginia. So I think that the opportunity for communication is very important. As it relates to punitive measures, I would not use that term. I think that is entirely too harsh. I think just like when you raise children. Are you a father? Okay, well let me tell you something. When you raise children, it's very important that they learn accountability for their behavior. And if they do not learn accountability for their behavior, then there is no incentive for them to modify their behavior and improve it. I don't think that we will be punitive, but we certainly were extraordinarily, and I mean extraordinarily sensitive to the request of the Democrats to insert some provisions in that budget that we collectively may not have thought were the best policy decisions, but we were trying to be collaborative and develop a bipartisan budget. You know, one of the amusing things to me is right after the negative vote on the budget and just before recessing, one of the Senate Democrats comes over to one of our members and says, is that item in the budget? Is that item in the budget that is of interest to me in my locality? And I wasn't engaged in the conversation. I wanted to say, did you go to sleep at the switch? There is no budget. So I don't see punitive measures coming about, but I could very well anticipate that there might be a redistribution of some of the funds in the budget that would further fund K through 12, that would further fund those safety net programs.
Just to be clear on next steps, is it procedurally, does the governor have, since there is no bill, does the governor have to send it down? Is that your understanding?
That is not the only option available.
What are the other options?
The other options available is that the Senate of Virginia could attempt to introduce another budget. The House of Delegates could attempt to introduce another budget. So there are a number of avenues that are available procedurally. We just need to explore those.
Tommy, a Republican in the House who has more than little to do with the budget said today that they probably would revise the budget over there on unanimous consent, send it back down to see if it will do any good, and that it probably wouldn't, and that we'd probably have to adjourn and come back in a special. Is that what you're trying to say about a little time to reflect? Is that what you mean?
Bob, that is not what I'm saying. That may be what my dear friends in the House of Delegates are saying. What I'm saying is we have not congealed on an alternative strategy at this point. But I would not anticipate that something is going to happen in the next day or so, because I think the citizens of Virginia need the opportunity, hopefully through irresponsible reporting, to appreciate exactly what has happened today and how tumultuous it is going to be.
Another House Republican said that they're somewhat frustrated with both sides. They said somebody in the Senate Republican caucus should have his behind kicked because this could have all been avoided just by putting Chuck Colton as co-chair. What do you think about that?
I think, with all due respect to that Republican member of the House, that they are very ill-informed, because that was not the modest request that was made. The request went far beyond that, and I expect that while you are a wonderful journalist, you're also being quite coy, and you know what the extent of their requests were. And I'm going to say once again, and let there be no mistake about it, the Senate Republicans are not going to be extorted by having the budget held in hostage over political shenanigans and bruised political egos. You can hear all of the rhetoric people want out of those Democrats. They lost 2 seats in the last election. More than 500,000 Virginians voted more for Republicans than they did for the Democrats. And I just think it is reprehensible that they think that they're going to bend over the entire Commonwealth of Virginia and disrupt the major policy decision over just raw, brutalized political will.
Senator,
Not happening, Bob.
you mentioned earlier that
Somebody else can talk.
you mentioned earlier this was very Washingtonian. Well, the ultimate Washingtonian would be a government shutdown. Do you see any scenario that would get that far?
You know, there's a reason, other than the fact that I'm not smart enough, that I never went to Washington, or either I was too smart. We do not have what Washington refers to as a continuing resolution that allows government to act on an interim basis. And maybe Walter or somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to dominate the dais here. But under our system of government, I believe that the governor of Virginia can continue to fund those areas of government that he considers essential or emergency. I'm not aware that there is a clear articulation or definition of exactly what those areas of government are. Because I know you all have a leisurely afternoon, I might invite you to take a look and see what happened in another Commonwealth when this happened. And that would be the Commonwealth of Kentucky, when they were confronted with a very similar situation. The governor there exercised his gubernatorial discretion and made the determination that everything in government in Kentucky was essential or emergency, and he continued to fund that. I've had no discussion with His Excellency on that, but there is some latitude, but we do not have the continuing resolution alternative.
For the Lieutenant Governor, one day, Senator McEachin was very adamant about pursuing the lawsuit against you. The very next day, the lawsuit was dropped, okay? So, was there some type of discussion about some type of concession, either on your part or their part? Was there any indication?
No, there were no discussions. In fact, the lawsuit in question was filed initially to try to prevent me from voting on organization of the Senate. If you remember, they sought an injunction from the court to prevent me from voting on organization of the Senate. The court denied their injunction. That left the lawsuit hanging there, and then the lawsuit was scheduled for a hearing actually on Tuesday of this week. And in advance of that hearing, they chose to non-suit the case. But there was no discussions between us or our lawyers. They simply advised us that they were going to non-suit the case. And, you know, I think they did that because it was pretty clear from some of the court's comments in the earlier rulings that the court was not predisposed to support their position. So that, I think, is why they made the decision. But there were no conversations between us about the non-suit of the case.